NYT, CCP, BTC is woke capital, communist capital, crypto capital. And communist capital is the simplest. It is you must submit. The Communist Party is powerful. CCP is powerful, and you are not. If you're in China, you just submit.
CCP is an embodiment of communist capital that you're talking about.
Well, yeah. So basically, and by the in China, they call it CPC. So basically, they don't like it usually if you say CCP, right? So like Communist Party of China as opposed to Chinese Communist Party. Basically, that is capitalism. That is a Chinese pool of capital, that billion-person pool. Okay, that's WeChat, and it's it's Alibaba, and it's that entire kind of thing. That is one just social network with currency. The whole thing's vertically integrated.
When we say communist, what do you mean here? Why is the word communist important? Why don't you just say China? So is communist an important word?
Or is
it just a catchy label?
It's a catchy label, but I think it's also important because it's paradoxical, right? So I had a thread on this. The future is communist capital versus woke capital versus crypto capital. Each represents a left-right fusion that's bizarre by the standards of the 1980s consensus. It's PRC versus MMT versus BTC, all right? And why is it bizarre by the standards of the 1980s consensus? Well, in the 1980s, you wouldn't think the communists would become capitalists, but they did. You wouldn't think that the wokes, the progressives, right, would become so enamored with giant corporations and their power, right? They've seen something to liken that, right? And you also wouldn't think that the non-Americans or the post-Americans or the internationalists would be the champions of capital because you'd think it's the American nation, right? Mm-hmm. So rather than the conservative American nationalists being the defenders of capital, you have the liberal Americans who are with capital, you have the communist Chinese who are with capital, and you have the internationalists who are with capital. And it's the conservative American nationalists who are in some ways against that, which is kind of funny, right? So it's like this weird ideological flippening that if you take the long lens, you have these poles that kind of repel each other, okay? So just on the CCP, NYT, BTC thing.
NYT, by the way, is woke capital.
Yeah. What is NYT? So its formula is a little interesting. If CCP is just you must submit because they're powerful, okay? And then you bow your head because the Chinese Communist Party is strong. Woke capital is you must sympathize. Why do you bow your head, Lex? Oh, because you're a white male. Therefore, you're guilty. You sympathize. You must bow your head because you are powerful. Mm-hmm. Yet, notice it ends in the same place, in your head looking to the ground, right? In China, it's because they are powerful, so therefore you must bend your head. For the wokes, it's the left-handed version where you are powerful, and that's shameful, so you should bow your head. Right?
Right.
Okay. But it ends in your head bowed. It's an ideology of submission. It's not that subtle, but it's like somewhat subtle. And then finally, crypto capital is head held high. You must be sovereign. Okay. And one of the things I point out in the book is each of these poles is negative in some ways when taken to extreme, but also negative in its opposite. For example, obviously just totally submitting to total surveillance is bad. But a society where nobody submits is San Francisco, where people just rob stores and walk out, in the middle, shoplifting, all these goods, and nothing happens, right? A society where, you have the woke level of sympathy, where you get to the kind of insanity of math is white supremacist and whatever, nonsense is happening today is terrible. But a society that's totally stripped of sympathy is also not one that one would want to be part of, right? That's just like whether it's 4chan's actual culture or it's feigned culture or something like that, or some weird combination, that's also not good. It's like Russia in the 90s, like nobody trusts anybody. That's also bad. And, being totally sovereign, that sounds good. And there's a lot that is good about it. And I'm sympathetic to this corner, but being totally sovereign, you go so capitalist, so sovereign that you're against the division of labor. You don't trust anybody. So you have to pump your own water and so on. So you actually have a reduced standard of living over here. Okay. Mm-hmm. And conversely,
basically like survivalist or whatever.
Survivalist type of stuff, right? And you just kind of, you just go kind of too crazy into that corner. And then, of course, though, the other extreme of, having no sovereignty is you will own nothing and be happy. Everything's in the cloud and can be deleted at any point, right? So each of these is kind of has badness when it's there, but also its total extreme opposite is bad. And so you want to kind of carve out like an intelligent intermediate of these three poles, and that's the decentralized center or the re-centralized center, I call it. Now, with that said, I think there is a repositioning in particular of woke capital that is happening. And I think if the 2000s was the global war on terror, and then the channel just changed to wokeness in the 2010s. And when I mean channel change, have you seen Paul Graham's graph, or actually David Rosado's graph that Paul Graham posted?
No, but
Well,
there's a good chance to say that Paul Graham is awesome.
Okay, yeah. And so here is this graph. Okay, David Rosado is a data analyst, I think, that put this together. So basically, this is a graph of the word usage frequency in New York Times, 1970 to 2018. And he's got some controls there.
Paul Graham tweets, hypothesis, although some newspapers can survive the switch to online subscriptions, none can do it and remain politically neutral. Quote, newspaper or record. You have to pick a side to get people to subscribe. And there's a bunch of plots. On the x-axis is years. On the y-axis is the frequency of use. And sexism has been going up, misogyny has been going up, sexist, patriarchy, mansplaining, toxic masculinity, male privilege. All these terms have been going up very intensely in the past in the past decade.
Yeah, but really 2013 is the exact moment. You see these things, they're flat and then just go vertical. Mansplaining, toxic masculinity.
What precisely happened in 2013?
So I talk about this in the book, but I think fundamentally what happened was tech hurt media and their revenue dropped by about $50 billion over the 4 years from 2008 to 2012.
Yeah.
Tech helped Obama get reelected, and media was positive on tech until December 2012. They wrote like the nerds go marching in the Atlantic. Then after January 2013, once Obama was ensconced, then the knives came out, because basically these tech guys were bankrupting them. They were through supporting them. And so the journals got extremely nasty, and just basically they couldn't build search engines or create social networks, but they could write stories and shape narratives. So a clear editorial direction went down that, essentially took all these weapons that had been developed in academia to win status competitions in humanities departments.
Yeah.
And then they just deployed them, right? And essentially somebody observed that wokeness is the combination of Foucauldian deconstruction and civil rights, where deconstruction takes away, the legitimacy of the old order, and then civil rights says, okay, the only thing that's good is this, right? Which says the old order was also bad in a different way, but this is what's good. And that is the underpinning ideology. All these words have embedded in them like an ideology, right? Another way of thinking about it is, this is not my reference, but I'll cite it anyway. The glossary of the Greek military junta, right? The creation and or use of special terms that are employed by the junta as propaganda tools, because essentially the word itself embeds a concept. You can Russell conjugate something one way or the other, right? Russell conjugation is this concept that I sweat, you perspire, but she glows. You can always take something, you are uncontrollably angry, but he is righteously indignant, okay? You have a thin skin, they clap back, right? So once you kind of realize that these words have just been chosen in such a way as to delegitimize their target, and they all went vertical in 2013, and they were suddenly targeted against their erstwhile allies, in tech, but also just across the country, you can see that this Great Awakening, that's what Iglesias called it by play on words, the Great Awakening, right? This kind of spasm of quasi-religious extremism. I wouldn't call it religious because it's not God-centered. It's really state and network-centered. So I call it a doctrine, which is a superset of religion and political doctrine. These words went vertical, and all the terrorism stuff you just noticed kind of fell off a cliff. That was the obsession of everything in the 2000s, and just channel change, right? It's amazing how that happened.
Yeah.
It's not like any of the pieces got picked up. Some of those wars are still raging, of course.
And there's victims to this wokeism movement. And
but in a weird way, even though some parts of it, just like, Syria, like there's wars in the Middle East that still keep raging, there's certainly active fronts of wokeism, but in a sense, the next shift is already on. You know why? It's a pivot from wokeism to statism. In many ways, NYT is sort of, and more generally the U.S. establishment is sort of kind of coming, you may not believe this, they're kind of coming back to the center a little bit, in the same way that Lenin, after the revolution, implemented the new economic policy, which you may be aware of, right? Which was just like X% more capitalism. He kind of boot on the neck, take control, but then ease up for a bit. And the so-called net men during the 20s were able to eke out something. There was like, oh, okay, fine, he's going to be easier on us. Then it intensified again because basically by loosening up, they were able to consolidate control. They weren't putting as much pressure on, right? Then it went extremely intense again, right? Similar to like Mao's like 100 flowers thing, let 100 flowers bloom. And, everybody came out and then he found out all the people who were against him and he executed a bunch of them, right? So what's happening now is NYT is, and more generally the US establishment is somewhat tacking back to the center where, they're not talking BLM and abolish the police. They're saying fund the Capitol Police, right? They've gone from the narrative of 2020, which was meant to win a domestic contest, where they said America's a systemically racist country, tear down George Washington, we're so evil, to the rhetoric of 2022, which is we're the global champion of democracy and every non-white country is supposed to trust us. Now, obviously those are inconsistent, right? If you're in India or you're in Nigeria and you just heard that America is calling itself, the same guys, by the way, saying it's so institutionally racist, systemically racist, and now you're saying, well, we're the leader of the free world and the number one. Obviously, there's an inconsistency between the domestic propaganda and the foreign propaganda, right? There's a contrast between abolish the police and put $2 billion for the Capitol Police. You can reconcile this and you can say the U.S. establishment is pro-federal and anti-local and state. So abolish the local police, who tend to be, Republican or rightist, but fund the FBI, fund the Capitol Police, who tend to be, just like in the, Soviet Union, the national things like the KGB, right? That were for the state, but there were always local nationalist ethnic insurgencies in like Estonia and other places, right? So you can reconcile them, but nevertheless, on its face, those are contradictory. So what are you going to get? I think you're going to get this rotation where a fair number of the folks on the sort of authoritarian right are kind of pulled back into the fold a bit. Okay. These are the cops and the military and whatnot, some of them, because as this decade progresses, you're going to see the signaling on American statism as opposed to wokeism. Okay. Which is 30 degrees back towards the center, right? Conversely, on the other side, you're going to have the left libertarians and right libertarians who are signaling crypto and decentralization and so on. Okay. And so the next one isn't red versus blue, it's orange versus green. It's the dollar versus Bitcoin. And so you have the authoritarians, the top of the political compass versus the quote libertarians, right? And here's the visual of that. So that's why, like, as I wrote the book and after I was like, I'm already seeing this this shift happening from war on terror to wokeism to American statism, right? And here, just take a look at this visual.
Interesting. So the visual is an animation transforming the left versus right, libertarian versus authoritarian to Bitcoin, dollar versus crypto.
That's right. And some folks switch sides, right? Because you have folks like, Jack Dorsey and a lot of the tech founders in basically the lower left corner, right, who were blue but are now going to become orange or are orange. And you have folks in the upper right corner who are going to, at the end of the day, pick the dollar and the American flag over the internationalist ideals of cryptocurrency.
The realigning, as you call it.